Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the next episode of the Blue Squad on health. Joining me today is Caoimhe. She is the managing director of health.tech, veteran of the pharma industry, I guess about 2 decades or so. I will let her introduce herself, but a fun fact, many of you who looks at her spelling, if you are Irish, you know. If not, it's pronounced Caoimhe. Welcome to the show, Caoimhe, and introduce yourself.
Thanks very much, Shameem. Yeah, and lovely introduction, though you have aged me significantly with giving me 2 decades in the pharma industry. You're not wrong, unfortunately, that's what's worse. But yes, so I'm originally a geneticist and translational medic by training. I spent about 18 years in the pharmaceutical industry through clinical development, into digital and data. I've worked across a number of different large pharma companies and in a number of different countries. I've focused primarily actually on neurodegeneration at one stage in my career, and then moved into trying to use digital and data to support patients better, to provide new business models for the pharma industry in more of a digital and data product side of things. And then after a while, I moved into startup innovation. So that was where the fun bit was. About 3 years ago, I moved up into startup innovation. I sit on the board of a number of startups who focus on digitally and data enabled R&D. And I wear several hats. So as Shameem says, I'm the managing director of the health.tech global conference, which will be in Basel in March next year, 3rd to the 5th of March 2026. But I also work for Basel Area Business and Innovation. I'm the director of health tech strategy and pharma for the DayOne initiative, which is the very, very niche accelerator and initiative focusing on health tech startups at the interface of pharma in R&D. And so I support the program there. And I also work for a Canadian-Australian startup called RxPX, and I'm their VP of Clinical Trial Application Development. So I support them in developing solutions or repackaging and repurposing their already marketed products so that it can be used within the clinical trial space.
You make me feel like a slouch, honestly. Do you get to sleep, or do you have extra hours in your day?
Someday for Christmas, I would quite like Santa to bring me 40-hour days. That would be lovely. But no, I'm actually quite militant about my sleep. I'm a bit grumpy if I don't sleep, but I tend to be going to bed. I like to get a minimum of 7 hours sleep. So all of the people who do this, I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and I have orange juice and lemon water. That's not me. I'm still asleep at 4 o'clock in the morning. But yeah, no, I'm quite strict on my sleep. And I love what I do, so it's part of it is pretty much a hobby as well.
And I need to get into that, but I just want to acknowledge the presence of my 2 usual suspects in this podcast or vlog, as people might say, Andreas and Carsten. Go ahead, say hi. I don't want a detailed bio. Most people would know it, but say hi.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning, Andreas.
Good morning. Really nice to meet you. Looking forward to the conversation today.
And as you know, this is not a structured conversation. We are just venting about the state of digital health as such. And a few years ago, I mean, not a lot of years, 3 years ago, I moved to Switzerland, and I have been looking at the landscape here, and I was curious because you have been in this field for quite a long time, right? So we started with the proposition that pharma will need digital health solutions and companion apps and other things. My experience has not been very encouraging. So I just wanted to start there with your experience in pharma. How serious are they in digital health applications? Are these pilots really working? All those sort of things. And after that, we'll talk about the Switzerland health ecosystem and the startup community and products here. So let's start with that. And Andreas and Carsten, you guys are actually veterans in this industry in Switzerland. So you would have a lot more to say about these things than I do. I'm just going to be that, wide-eyed guy just sitting and learning. So go ahead.
Okay, would you like me to kick off?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so I've, as you could probably imagine, a lot of opinions on this. I've spent a lot of time on both sides. So I've been on the side of in pharma trying to stand up solutions, but also on the other side supporting companies that have solutions that want to put them into pharma. I think I can probably boil it down into a very, very simple analysis of this at the moment, and that is pharma do want this. They are relatively serious about it. They just are going through what I would describe as a slightly tumultuous period in pharma at the moment, whereby it's a nice to have, but it's not necessarily a need to have right now, and their priorities are on other things. So it's something, unfortunately, that I would say, like all innovation, when people are deemed an innovation function or they're in innovation, it becomes the first one that is deprioritized or budget is cut from or things like that. So there are incredible people within pharma banging their head against a brick wall trying to get things moving and get things going forward. But I think for it to really succeed, somebody has to take a big risk and say, look, we are going to fund this for 5 years. We are not going to pull your funding after 2 years because you haven't shown immediate results. We are going to take the risk. We are going to fund it for 5 years. We are going to put it through clinical development from phase 2 onwards, so that product, those digital health apps are embedded into the product and how the product is used, marketed, rolled out and adopted. So we are going to take that risk, and that's essentially my take on it at the moment. When we get that risk
question, I would say that there are pharma companies who did that actually, and who put money even more than 5 years on such programs. I mean, I spent 10 years at Roche, and was part of such programs. And I see the problem not necessarily at the stage of putting money on it and doing it, because such big, especially the big pharmas, also Biogen, I mean, they had huge programs over more than 10 years. And Biogen, I think earlier this year or end of last year, they decided, okay, let's shut this all down, except the things which have a very direct connection to our core business and our core distribution channels, which to me makes totally sense, because otherwise investing into these things, it's a diversification, it's not a portfolio extension or something. I see the problem rather on the commercialization side of the story. How do you bring such things into market, and for such pharma, manufacturing, whatever companies, product companies, what makes a business out of it? And there I see the problem. If I'm a pharma company and my core business is developing drugs, biologics, chemicals, characterizing them, going through clinical development, clinical trials, providing evidence, getting approval, and distributing them into the market, dealing with market access, blah, blah, blah. And this business has a total different cost structure than a digital health applications business. And I think most of these companies, they struggle in that place, and not necessarily in the place of putting money on it or funding it. Maybe to be a little provocative, I even believe that many pharmaceutical companies put hundreds of millions, if not billions, on this topic through the last 10 years, just because they needed to execute on innovation expectations of their shareholders, but not really thinking about or dealing with the challenges, what it means to go all the way and building such new business, meaning executing on that innovation mandate to the pushing through to the very end.
Yeah. So I had to break it to you, Andreas.
So I believe it's in many cases rather PR activities, or it's a tooling activity around clinical trials or something, but not necessarily a build here a new business which generates an impact and a value in healthcare.
Okay, so just to add, you do actually understand, you've just proven my point. My point was the fact that it is seen as is one of the first things to go. And your point exactly about Biogen is that they cut it out when it wasn't core to the business pipeline. And so that was my exact point. So I summarized in a very generalization at the start, but my point was that whenever the prioritization of pharma is pipeline and delivery of drugs and molecules, because that's what they know how to do and that is their core business. When something is outside of that, they will drop that quickly. One, because it is a distraction from where they like to spend the money, and two, because they don't understand how to commercialize it.
Exactly.
It's not understood how
that and not necessarily coming. Yeah. Same happening if we look now at the kind of the Swiss perimeter. Same happened at Novartis. Actually, in a very drastic manner, same happening at Roche, and others as well.
May I comment on it? Because for me, it's a bit.
We're expecting you to comment on things.
Yeah, good. So because my point is, on the one hand side, you say they take it serious. On the other hand side, you say they don't. Because actually, if I take it as a side activity and it's not core, I cannot take it serious. Sorry. And then we are on the level of what Andreas said. It's a PR, marketing, shareholder activity. So the statement that pharma takes digital health or digital drugs serious, I don't see it, because there was just shitloads of money to bring it to the point spent over the last decade, and nothing came out of it, to be blunt. And it's other organizations, smaller ones, where you also engage startups, which have their better chances and better opportunities to be successful in that space. And if you look also, I can take any pharma company, their real progress, the real big steps, what they have done in the last 10 to 20 years was acquiring companies which have done it outside of their core activities. So like if you really seriously look into what their real pipelines were, which were in-house developed, versus what they have acquired in order to be successful down the road, it was I would argue, more than 90% of the cases, it was external acquisitions. So it's right, they have to do research and so on and so forth to educate the people eventually to do the right acquisition and so on and so forth. And eventually you could also argue that was the same activity in the digital space, but the market just didn't develop as they might have expected. But I don't think that they really took it serious to change that, because if you really take that serious, and if we're really talking about digital drugs, which are deeply integrated into this kind of stuff here as well, then you start fundamentally disrupting your core activity. Because we are moving then not into late stage treatment where you're doing action up on incidents, but we are talking much more about early and preventing the onset of that thing. And it's a clear disruptive activity if you look in the different types of innovation, what you have. And you have to be really, really bold as an industry to go and disrupt your own activities. And if you go outside of healthcare and other industries, there's really few companies and few industries which have managed to do that themselves.
But since we are all in violent agreement about the pharmaceutical industry, not necessarily, although probably having the capital, not necessarily being the one to change the world, I would be rather interested, given your experience or your experience and your engagement with, for example, DayOne and Basel area and so on, I would be particularly interested on how and how can we actually make these changes in healthcare? Because if I look at policy changes and the current policy reforms and debates in the Swiss healthcare system, for example, the digital piece is one of 4 pillars in that whole strategy 2035 or something of the Swiss government. So something in healthcare, some structures in healthcare will be changing, need be changing. And the question is a little bit, and especially with institutions like Basel area and DayOne or others, where you have experience, how can one actually leverage these channels in order to bring innovation into use?
That's a really, really good question. Well, there are a number of different ways. Policy is one way. Funding is another. If we break it down into what is funded by the government and what is funded by private entities, then we get into a very, very messy discussion. Switzerland's a really interesting ecosystem around that one, obviously, because if we look at, obviously the funding is split both from a federal and a cantonal level, so it's quite difficult to get a one kind of movement forward on how Switzerland is going to approach the form of digitalization or improvement in that respect. So that's a bit of a challenge in the starting point. There are cantons, like for example, the Canton Basel-Stadt is behind DayOne. So we're a public-private partnership. We're partially funded by the canton, which is a great start. Our struggle is that we are partially funded by the canton, which means we have to do business development ourselves with private entities, and that is a challenge in its own right. It also means that we have deliverables, KPIs to the canton, which are sometimes sensible, sometimes restrictive about how we actually conduct what we do. We're very well aware that we need to deliver value back to the canton because this is cantonal money that is supporting us, and therefore we're very conscious of that. But sometimes having the freedom to work a little bit outside of those kind of KPIs to deliver or shift the KPIs so that they're actually delivering value as value evolves, because that is another big thing, the evolution of what value can be in something like digital health or health tech is so quickly changing as either the market changes, the customers change. So obviously we're quite reliant on, to Carsten's point, whatever Pharma have decided and what the value or the flavor of the month is. We also have to pivot towards that because they're the people we're trying to develop solutions for and get solutions and startups embedded into the pharma space. So we're quite dependent on that. And when you run relatively long contracts, what you have agreed at the start to win those contracts is maybe not necessarily what's going to be value add by the end of it. So it starts to look a little like, well, should we have more kind of adaptive conditions to contracts, especially governmental contracts, to allow us to continue adding value to the ecosystem as the ecosystem evolves, and so that the canton get what they need.
When you say ecosystem in that
Yes.
context, what does it consist of? Because I remember Carsten and I, some almost 10 years ago, probably, no, maybe 8 years ago, we had a discussion with people in the early days of DayOne and these whole activities. And we made a proposal on how one could, it was the start of that DayOne accelerator at the time. It's probably almost 10 years. We made a proposal on how one could actually de-risk certain things and leverage other things if one would have a more strategic approach to it. And during that conversation, we noticed that at the end of the day, the people at the time who've been running that, they're not incentivized by improving healthcare or the healthcare ecosystem around Basel. They're incentivized by bringing over the next 5 years something like 3 companies which pay taxes in Basel.
That is correct.
And if that's the case, so what is then the ecosystem we are working on? Because if it's around increasing attractiveness for companies to get there, I would probably put other emphasis on the ecosystem than if it's actually around saving fundamental healthcare problems in terms of healthcare funding, financing, whatever. Then I put other emphasis or other weights on different elements of that ecosystem.
I think that's an interesting observation, right? So from my personal experience itself, I can talk about that is when you try to establish a company and go further forward in a canton in Switzerland, the question is not about the idea that is coming in. It's more about how much tax revenue can you generate and how much of revenue itself. Even the banks come and ask these questions. Going into a startup, you're investing in a company, you have some projections, but you cannot be held to that. It is more about an iterative process. And that way, outsiders are not going to come in and start innovating in Switzerland. People within Switzerland might try to do it, but then you're limiting the amount of innovation that is coming in. And my experience has been, like Andreas and I have discussed about this quite a lot, is very close to outsiders. It is a very very incestuous, for lack of a better word, kind of a ecosystem. So there is a closely held, closely guarded, no outsiders can come in. And we can talk a lot about the ecosystem itself. But before I get into that segue, going back to what you said initially, the need for pharma, you said, is not there. It's a nice to have. So that itself, everybody who is in business knows that when you try to sell, if you try to sell a luxury product, that's a different thing. But if you sell a need, it becomes more important. Now, the other day I was listening to Bloomberg TV, and they were talking about the revenue cliff that is going to come to the pharma. $250 billion of revenue is going to go away, evaporate. And so they are scrambling to find new ways to develop. And the pharma business model is to develop chemicals and sell it as a product. That's pretty much it. So the idea that there's a big segment called digital therapeutics. Now, the distinction between digital therapeutics and digital health as such, I don't think I need to explain to you guys, but for the viewing people, I'm saying it's more about the companion apps and the operations, whereas digital therapeutics itself is a remedy that can help. So my question is, has the promise of digital therapeutics been validated? If that is the case, are pharma companies going to go, shouldn't they go after it? Or the other method, I think I talked about in a previous long ago discussion, is just like Tesla came as an outsider to the car industry and built a different model of cars, and he succeeded probably because he was not part of the industry. So is innovation going to happen outside of pharma rather than the pharma trying to, because they are not going to change what they already know and works. So I think too much of a question. I think we'll spend some little bit of time on it, and then we can go about the Swiss startup ecosystem and all that.
I'm going to give a bit of an opinion on that one, Shameem, because I think you've raised two things that are actually very different. And that's why I think we can address those slightly separately. If we look at my point around digital health solutions and them, we lose them because of them being nice to have. The point is where I think pharma are missing out on digital health solutions is that they themselves are not going to be revenue generators. They may be revenue drivers because they can collect data, they can help to support better product development, they can help to support better efficacy, understanding, they can help to support better patient engagement and adherence. There are a whole load of things it can do. We just don't have an awful lot of data. And as someone who has tried to say, this is what we should implement, the reply I get a lot or have been given is, that's really nice, but can you show how that drives revenue forward? Because the revenue in pharma is very much still wrapped around the molecule and the drug product. So that's one thing. The thing about digital therapeutics is I'm not sure Carsten, I think it was yourself that said about pharma will buy in the companies that have done innovation. So I don't think that pharma have the internal motivation to step into digital therapeutic development. I'd say if pharma start to do that and start to use that as part of their product line, it will be through acquisitions. I think the digital therapeutics as a field has an awful lot more scope for development from smaller niche tech companies because they don't have the level of baggage that pharma has with regards to what they currently are developing. They don't have the shift, the mindset into looking into or build an entire new function and set up from scratch to focus on a digital product, a digital therapeutic, as opposed to what they're very used to and what they're very good at doing, which is the molecule product. So I would say that the opportunities for digital therapeutic development are bigger and better for small niche external companies than they would be for pharma. I think it's too much of a lift and shift for pharma to do that just yet. Carsten, you're on mute.
Yeah. I agree. And this is the thing, like what I'm always thinking, and I think Amazon is the best example for it. And then I always bring up that example because the entire today pharma and diagnostics, healthcare business in general relies on how reimbursement works and how the entire financial activities are set up. In particular, if you think about, let's take any type of, most of the global market is out of pocket. One has to be also honest about it. It's most of the countries in the world. There is no insurance system, whatever, if it's public or private. But let's take the insurance setting. If you compare it, the US, it's the most expensive healthcare system in the world. Switzerland, I think, is number 2. It always changes, 3, 2, whatever, but they're in the top 5, so to say, of the most expensive healthcare systems. And if you look into, especially when we're talking about digital, Amazon has set up an ecosystem in the meanwhile where they can deliver services to people. And finally, also there is this add-on package to Prime where you can have the 24/7 health services for $99 per month, which is nothing compared to what you have if you have an insurance package in the US. But that ecosystem, what they've built up there, enables smaller companies to really, Amazon is really good in that, also especially in that IT space, also in other industries, to enable these small organizations, companies, whatever they are, startups, however you want to call them, to deliver services to patients where a pharma company would never be able to do because of many reasons, because they're highly relying still on the current system as we have it. And secondly, not having access and infrastructure in order to deliver this kind of services. So I think that's the main thing. For me, the question is also, you can challenge it and can say, like, there is an erosion anyway. And as you pointed out, Sam, there is lots of revenue being lost because of multiple reasons. One of them is being Mr. Trump's activities. One of them is also what China is doing with the reimbursement or was doing with the reimbursement. So there's lots of activities in the world where large organizations, either the insurances themselves or the country is saying we're not willing to spend that much money on the drugs and on the diagnostics and on the healthcare system overall. So there's a big pressure on the market. That's the one hand side, but eventually there is a even bigger problem for the companies coming up from Alibaba, Tencent, Amazon, and so on and so forth, which have the technical and ecosystem capabilities in order to deliver these digital drugs, digital therapeutics, digital diagnostics, and also that what you were saying on where pharma could benefit from is inform their trials, their research with digital information, digital cohorts, having the right patients, and so on and so forth. But that means that if I look at the picture, these digital companies will rule the space, and they're actually ruling it at the moment, because if pharma relies on this, and they will, because we will, like, also let's be honest, if you look into drugs and how a drug concept works, and I oversimplify certainly, so what I'm saying is, like, don't challenge me on that for absolute correctness, but the business is very simple. You invest 10 to 12 years, whatever is at the moment the time axis to develop a new drug, and you invest something between 4 and 8 billion money, and then you want to have the return of investment within, say, 10 years at max, which means you either have a drug which hits a lot of people, so you have a lot of customers, so you have a lower price to get the billions back what you have invested, or you have a drug which is very niche and is very expensive per unit. So that's the two mechanisms, as simple as that. And that, as what we're seeing today, is a more and more personalized care, which means you're not going to address the masses. So your population is going to be small. So your per unit cost has to be higher, which is contradictory to that what all the healthcare systems are doing, pushing down the costs. So for me, it's a real trap we're in, or this industry is in, and also that eventually a healthcare system in where it has to change, because even if you look at the current system, it cannot be sustainable in the way as it is at the moment, because we have an overaging population which really craves for more services, and there's less personnel, and logically also that thing drives digital, because if you have not enough doctors to serve this population, there's only one way to deal with it. You have to automate it, you have to digitize it, or you don't deliver the service anymore. Or you have what we already have also, you have a social difference between people which are wealthy and can afford the service, or the others just don't get any service. And that's what I'm curious in all your activities, what you're involved in, which is on startups, on corporates where you have worked before, and all this innovation. What is your vision on the way out, or how does it look from your view, say a future in 5 to 10 years, from that what you experience, what you see, what's happening on a global scale, where also the population is developing towards? What is your understanding of how might the way out look like?
That's heavy, Carsten.
I know, sorry, it's heavy, but
That's
we
really
are not
heavy.
here to discuss light things. I know it's heavy.
Suddenly brought down the mood like 2 degrees, but anyway, let's go.
No, I don't think it's brought down my mood. It's given me a lot to chew over. These are the kind of things that if I knew about them beforehand, I could have thought about them, because there's so much nuance, Carsten, and I am very well aware that I'm going to kind of word vomit now, and it'll probably not be exactly what I mean when
That's
because of the
exactly
nuance.
this what the show is about. It's not about people preparing and coming. We want to know what's in you.
No,
Yeah.
I know, but I'd like to sound at least slightly eloquent, as opposed
Come
to
on.
these
Yeah,
are all the
it's
words I'm
fine.
throwing at the wall.
Take your
We
time.
call ourselves the. Anyway.
Yeah, so
No, take your time. It's
yeah,
fine.
so there are two things that you have raised that I think are very important in it. One is the digital divide, and one is, well, actually there are three things. If I break them down into, the cost of medication and the healthcare system and the personalization, so that's one side of things, because I agree completely with you. There's to a certain extent, our ability to commercialize the science of precision medicine is not there. That I think for the pharma industry, that is our first big challenge, because essentially we have so much new information about disease and biology and how to really target the right patients, so the right patients are going to get the best treatment. But we have not been able to work out how we do that at scale for small patient groups. So that's my first point. So I would agree entirely on that one. So if I'm saying in the next 5 to 10 years, if pharma are going to focus on one thing, and if the pharma want to keep themselves alive, I've said a couple of times, maybe at some stage, big pharma will become a phase 3 filing machine, where you have much better connections and collaborations with universities, academic groups, small biotech, small startups that are actually doing the initial development and bringing to proof of concept a product that then pharma will then take the massive machinery it takes to get to a drug to market and use that, wrap it up and push it out there. So that's one way of doing kind of more of that kind of model of bringing things forward and possibly making them more affordable. But essentially that, for the next 5 to 10 years, to me, regardless of all of the digital health apps that we know are valuable for drugs on the market that can provide a huge amount more information, if I'm looking at pharma and saying, what is it you need to prioritize? It is, how do you make cheaper pipelines, and how do you scale cheaper pipelines at smaller patient groupings? So that's, do you look at molecular backbones that have, basically plug and play different mechanisms of action, bolt-ons that, depending on a genetic mutation, that's how an individual spectrum disease can be treated with a backbone and plug in. I'm making stuff up sometimes, but essentially, if you're looking at that as the first challenge, that's what I think pharma in the next 5 to 10 years should be focusing on. How do they make their drugs more adaptable and cheaper? Because otherwise, it doesn't matter how good your drug is. If you develop it for a patient population of 10 or 15, you're probably never going to be able to get that to a population of 10 or 15, because they won't be able to afford it. There'll be no health system that can afford that. Carsten, you're on mute, so you probably have to.
I consciously mute because there's some background noise, so I just try to switch off. It's okay.
So that to me is that's the first one. If 5 to 10 years, that's our first one. The two other things that I think of from 5 to 10 years are my worry is the digital divide. And it is a genuine worry, in that we talk about all of the technology that can be used, all of the things that can be developed, all of the things that are available to be used, but we look at it from a very privileged perspective of, we have wearables, we have iPhones or Androids that are able to run apps that we can use, and that's fantastic for those of us who are privileged enough to have those. But are we then leaving behind people who actually are probably more likely to benefit from the solutions that are developed but don't have the access to them? So that actually, I've had a couple of conversations with a number of people, and I'm really interested in watching and seeing what comes out of Africa, because they very much develop for the population that are using it, and they're not an awful lot of attention is paid to it, but they do some really, really interesting things when it comes to particularly things like maternal health. They have incredible systems at remote maternal health in Africa that is using technology, but doesn't necessarily mean that you're using an iPhone. They have a lot of stuff when it comes to things like data can be collected and then it's stored securely and uploaded whenever Wi-Fi is available, because they maybe have Wi-Fi outages. Those are incredible. So we should actually be learning from
We do exactly.
people. Yeah.
Sorry, we do exactly that in Ghana. Our systems
Yep.
are deployed in the whole country of Ghana, and
Yep.
we do what exactly you said. But I
Exactly.
had to plug
Yeah.
my company in there.
No, of course, somewhere. But I'm saying, there's an awful lot. We have a wonderful ability to innovate for the sake of innovation because we think it's cool. Innovation for the sake of innovation because it's cool is never really going to live. It's just going to be, it's a luxury product at that stage. But when you innovate to solve a business problem, when you innovate to solve a patient problem, when you innovate to solve something that is going to fix a thing that is needed, that's scalable innovation at that stage. I've had a conversation. I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago in Brussels with some folks who were talking about how their companies innovate, and I said, I have to be honest with you, you don't innovate. This isn't innovation. This is evolution. What you're doing is you're meeting your population at what they need, and you're changing and updating your products so that they meet your population where they need it. It's not innovation. That's evolution. And I think to a certain extent, innovation is a term that has kind of been burnt, because innovation is not necessarily connected to ROI of a business. Innovation is seen as shiny and new and exciting, and let's do a cool thing and invent something. And that's when I said at the very start, that's where it becomes a nice to have rather than a need to have, because everybody sees it as that's fancy, but where is it connected to the ROI? Where is it connected to the business problem? Where is it going to solve and generate the revenue that we need to deliver that forward? So we need to start thinking more about how our business is evolving as opposed to how our business is innovating.
That's a good point, and I like the analogy with Africa because I also bring it in different contexts, but I also think so because in Africa there is real innovation, there is a real need, and the example what you brought up, you don't need fancy technology. At the end of the day, that can be very analog and solves a problem, but those guys have a real need because there is the ratio of person to medical doctor is, I don't know, 1 in 300,000, 1 in 30,000, or something like that. And that's, I think, this is also for me. I think we are in, say, the countries where you have access to wearables in one way and which are rather cheap and getting cheaper and so on and so forth. That's a complete different level of healthcare compared to Africa or other countries, because there you're just giving birth is the major problem. Here, this is not a problem. Worst case, let's say Switzerland, if you take it as an example, you can go to any pharmacy and you can give birth there. There is medical personnel to a certain extent which can help you out in that situation. So actually, if you're talking about a medical need, it's not existing, because what you're also saying, it's nice to have. The level of medical service what we are requesting is a level of nice to have, because even if you take cancer, and I'm over exaggerating, but at the end of the day, in Africa, in many cases, you're not going to reach the age that you're going to get cancer. There is exceptions, and I'm not going to discuss about this. Cancer and all the metabolic diseases, what we see is the societal problems of our society, which is super wealthy and which gets very, very old. These type of problems don't even show up in those countries. And therefore, eventually, and this is the thing where I would like to also get your opinion, because maybe we're here in a developed world with the fancy apps and all the technology, we're on a different level of healthcare innovation, because what I see, and then also having talked to medical personnel on different levels in different medical fields, is what I said. It's a societal problem. It's a health problem. Not that it's that what we call actually a health and disease state. It's staying healthy, being healthy, or remaining the healthy state. And especially when you look into the US, where you have this extremely high level of metabolic disease rates and cardiovascular issues, that's not the fault of the people. It's the fault of the societal situation, where you have no chance then having three jobs, the cheapest food you can get, you have to be fast, and so on and so forth. And maybe this is the level of change and innovation which has to be done in developed countries versus not so developed countries, where we should not talk about drugs and this kind of stuff, but we should talk about what do we have to do in order to keep the people healthy so that they can age healthy, and not just support it with some drugs. Because it's like, I recently had a very funny comparison where when you take the new the new drugs where you can easily lose weight, and there will be more coming to the market. It's very easy. There's two ways to lose weight. Either you stay healthy, you eat properly, and so on and so forth, or you just take one of these drugs, which is the easy way out. And there's certain implications if you do so. But it's the same thing, like if you want to lose hair, and I don't have much anymore, but I shave to get rid of the hair, and it's a temporary situation. But there would be another situation if I want to get rid of all my hair in a short term without big effort. I would take chemotherapy, and the problem is solved as well, and it's also temporary. But the question is, which way do I go? The one is more cumbersome. I have to shave, and the other one I just have to take a pill. But there is a consequence to my body. So to me, the question, I think for me, healthcare innovation has these two different levels, as you were pointing out. In that stuff where you have to really deliver service on a different level, where we're talking about giving birth, versus where we are, which is very saturated, and you can get service at any corner at any point in time.
Can I bring back the conversation to Switzerland per se, right, and the ecosystem here? But when you discussed Africa and you talked about Switzerland, and you said the needs are implied that needs may be different, but when I look at it, in both these countries, affording healthcare is a problem. Whether in Switzerland or the United States, everybody is complaining about the cost of period. There is no question anywhere about it. So I'm thinking it's kind of like what they talk about, the air expanding to the volume it is being provided, right? You can compress air and it becomes small, and if you expand it, it gives. So the more the country is affluent, the healthcare cost somehow finds a way to expand itself to that level, is what I am seeing. I said in my last podcast also, in India, you go there, the blood test, everything, they come and collect it, and you pay like 50 francs. Every single thing is being collected. Now, is it possible to do that over here? Yes, but then there is a standard of living. So what I'm trying to say is the components that go into making healthcare is expanding everywhere. And when there is a room, or when there is a perception of a room, it goes higher. That brings me back to our conversation about value-based care. Now, we all know that the current methodology where you are reimbursing people for everything you do for a procedure or to cure a malady is what is being reimbursed. And then somebody gets to sit down and judge whether this is the right treatment for this, which is why you get denied or not. Now, if you go back, and you alluded to it, Carsten, earlier about the reimbursement problem, and many of these innovative, and you have gone into the definition of innovation. I'm just keeping that aside for the time being. And all these innovative products are not able to succeed. One of the main reasons, as was discussed by Alexei in the last conversation that we had, was reimbursement. You come up with an innovative model, you're not getting reimbursed. What value-based healthcare could do, and which is already doing, is that it focuses on the outcome. And so if a patient is suffering from a particular thing, you are allocating X amount of dollars, and the provider can choose what kind of treatment to do. So if it is part digital health or part device, if it falls within that allowable expenditure, then it is good. So that is focusing more on outcomes. And here in Switzerland, thought value-based care because I read online there is an organization called VBHC Swiss. I tried to contact them. It takes forever for them to respond. If they are really serious about it, there would be somebody out there doing that. But is it possible for value-based care to come in and help change the way things are being done? And I think it will directly result in many of these innovative startups, find success.
The one, all right, so I've Carsten said a lot of really good things, and I want to touch on some of those ones there because I think I really am interested in one of them. To circle back to your point of value-based care and how essentially if there's a certain amount of money up front and then the provider then defines how that money is used across which type of thing, what we're also needing to really pull out of that one is it's not just the provider, it has to be the patient as well that has a say in this, because that is, when you have ownership of your own health and you are more informed and you're better aware of what's going on and how you want to live your life. So I've said in a number of different presentations and things, I'm very, very pro people having. I'm very pro of two things, which sometimes make me a little bit unpopular. One is autonomous ownership of your own health data so that you can make decisions based on your health data for your lifestyle. Nobody should define what health is to an individual, but that individual should be empowered to be able to decide how they want to live their life. And this came out of a conversation I had with someone who once told me he didn't want to be told to run more. He wanted to eat cake. Leave him alone. He didn't want to have somebody telling him something else. So, that's one thing. So the autonomous ownership. So value-based care, I think, really will work if the patient or the person is involved in the decision-making process and how they want to live their life. So that's first thing. The second thing that Carsten mentioned that I'm really very keen on is that at the moment, we are a reactive society to health. We are not proactive. And that's across the board. The Nordics might come after me on that one because I'm having a lot of conversations with the Nordics at the moment about how they do it. But that is something that I think if you're talking about real societal shift changes, then the whole thing needs to talk about how we are proactive in health supporting and we talk about changing from sick care to health care and all of those general things that are talked about. So that's another thing just to comment. And the one that I get most of the time that gets most people going, is we need to consumerize healthcare. And I don't mean that everything is sold on Amazon or eBay or things like that. I mean that the treatments are designed for the consumer so that the consumer actually, and that is why Amazon, Netflix, Apple, Alibaba, these things work because they are a consumer-based platform. They design for how their users and buyers are going to want things. And that is where healthcare needs to go. It's not about we're telling you what we think you should do and what you need. It's about meeting the user where the user is and helping the user be able to have something that, again, is supporting their autonomous ownership of their health data and the decisions made for their lifestyle. And I think that is where, if you ask me, where the biggest challenge is that pharma still doesn't do that. There's still a missing consumerization.
Yeah.
They are trying to do that, though. Amazon has tried to do that. I'm sure all these big tech platforms have tried to do that. They haven't been successful. Like, I know, I forget the initiative that they, JP Morgan and Berkshire Hathaway came together and tried to make all these things work. Then there was later there was another company that tried to do this. I'm quite sure, given the opportunity, all those Chinese companies, Tencent and all this, they would love to do that. Now there is some legal hurdles to do that, but I'm not sure. So, in other words, my question is: if somebody should have succeeded, wouldn't it have been them? Those are the companies that have the infrastructure, the wherewithal, and the commitment to do it, but they did not succeed. So fundamentally, what is it that is preventing a consumerization of healthcare? Now, I know when it comes to drug pricing, because obviously the Swiss companies are taking advantage of the American consumer and charging much more in the US, where the same drug, and I know this from personal experience, one of my family member is on a medication. In the US, I have to pay $2,000. Here, without insurance of the pharmacy, I can get it for 300 francs. So there is definitely a difference there. Now, these so what I was trying to say is on the drug pricing and selling, Mark Cuban has come out with a company which will enable you to get a lot of drugs at cost plus a little bit of things. So those kind of consumerization is happening. Now, the conflict is, or the battle is between mass market and personalization. Medicine and the drive right now, we are all trying to do is everybody is different. Whatever you might say, we are different. And the focus is getting into more and more personalization. And that is conflicting with this mass market philosophy of how to do it. So unless you can make personalization mass market, go ahead. I think you have a.
I think my point is not so much the mass marketing of things, it's about the design meeting the person where the person wants. That when I talk about the consumerization, I don't talk about the commercialization, I call about the consumerization of healthcare.
I understand what you're saying. So it's not mass marketing, it is marketing to that individual needs of a particular, and that is going to be very, very costly is what I'm saying. I think there is a reason why it is generalization. You know, that big controversy about all the medical studies are made by white men for white men, and it may not work for African Americans or Indians or for that matter women, right? It is said that. So I don't know how you are going to crack that nut in that sense.
No, I don't have the answer to that either, but I
So
know
let's
it's the
just
problem.
go back. I think we're almost at a 1 hour, but I think
I
we'll
just want to comment on one thing, which I think for me at least is really crucial. And I think it's the stuff which will crack everything. I think the key is the health awareness of the individual and being able to manage that. Because like if you serve the need of an individual today in the current state where they are, is I go to a doctor, I feel sick, you make me healthy. That's it. It's if I go with my car, which is, I don't know, a VW Golf standard thing, and I drive the thing constantly with maximum RPM with 200 kilometers on the highway. And then I go to the garage and say, hey guys, can you please fix the engine? It's somehow broken. I don't know why. Yeah. So I'm not aware that it doesn't make sense to drive the car with these conditions or without oil or without whatever. Yeah? So and this is the thing which is missing, because that's also, if you develop a solution today for the patients, and I'm talking explicitly now patients, not citizens, and I'm distinguishing typically, then they will just go there and say, help me, and do magic, and that's it. They have no responsibility about the situation today. Even in treatment, like as we know it, drug adherence. You should change your diet when you have certain types of medication to support it. The medical doctors tell them, the people don't do, because of this non-existence of health awareness. And I'm absolutely with you. If you want to smoke, if you want to drink, if you do whatever you want, go for it. It's fine. It's your life. But consciously decide on it and also be aware what are the consequences of what you when you're doing it. I have no problem with that. As long as you're not harming with your behavior someone else, I don't care. It's your life, your decision, how you want to live it. I don't want to have, and I don't know how, I'm not living in China, and I don't know, maybe there you have the opportunity with all the surveillance and all the technology to punish people. And yesterday I just learned in China, it is like, if you don't care of your parents, elderly parents, which go into a care state, and even you're abroad, the government will go after you and force you to take care. So there's a governmental enforcement of responsibility to the health of your parents. So I, as a child, also have then the responsibility in terms of making sure my parents can live or have lived a healthy life, because else it's going to fall on myself. Because then I have to pay a lot of money in order to cure the situation. And this is, I think, at the moment, the biggest hurdle. Also, there's a lot of technical things, also technical in terms of reimbursement. But I think the main step to make the change is a societal thing. And there I see, as we were discussing, and if you look at what Sam brought up, the Amazon Haven project in the US, where they failed, they've massively burned money. And there was certainly a reason. One reason was the perversive incentivations of the healthcare system in the US, and that they could not make it, even though lots of money and lots of powerful people were all together. But the societal change has to happen. And that's the thing, that you have this really health awareness. What does health mean for me? And I talked to people where they were telling me in the UK, for example, there's some influencers, somehow medical doctors, which bring health awareness to the population. And there's things going on. But the moment we make this step, then the entire thing starts changing. And it's not like, oh, shit, now I have some type of cancer and I have to deal with this situation. But yeah, maybe, you were smoking all lifelong, and there's lots of people which were smoking all lifelong and never had lung cancer. There's cause and activities and consequences. So
Carsten, just trying to wrap up things here, but that law, they actually passed one in India too. You had an obligation to take care of your elder parents. Now, and philosophically, I agree with that, because, if they are taking care of you when you are young, they brought you up, then you have and if you have a right to inherit their property as well, you might as well have to take. So anyway, coming back to this thing, Caoimhe, what I would like to know is, what would you like to tell our viewers in the US about the activities of the Canton of Vaud and Basel, and what do you see is happening here, and how can they kind of help or contribute to that initiatives, or what should they be aware of and learn?
Okay, so within Basel, there's an awful lot going on. I think from my perspective, the two things that I would focus on are the DayOne initiative. So if you're in health tech and you are a startup and you are interested in really being able to understand that interface to pharma, how you bring your product to pharma, how you set yourself up to be best positioned for pharma integration, I would be seriously considering applying for the accelerator. So that would be my first one. Equally, if you are a pharma or a large-scale life science company that is interested in acquisitions or collaborations with smaller innovative companies, come and fund us, because we can't do what we can do for free. That's our big challenge. We need the private funding to be able to, essentially, the frustration, the biggest, we need the private funding to be able to deliver solutions and best practices for them. That's the challenge, is we do not do this acceleration for our own fun. Our end goal clients are large life science companies and pharma. We are doing this for you. If you want to be able to access these kind of startups and this type of acceleration, and you want to see these things coming through for your business problems, help out the people who are trying to help you. So that would be my big thing on that one. And then my other plug is for the health.tech Global Summit next year in March. We have an incredible program. And we have the most amazing speakers coming. And I know this because I'm responsible for the program. So I see who's coming in and who is joining. And it's not, the thing is, we're not going for commercial pitches. There's no commercial pitches. We're very content focused. We're very ROI focused. Everything is based around problem, solution, outcome. It is come and listen to case studies of people who have had your problems and have worked on it and what they've tried to do to fix it, and come and learn. And come and learn from the people who are doing it. These are not high-level strategy pitches from the usual people on the circuit. These are people who are at the coalface, who are doing the innovation, who are doing the change, and can prove that they're doing it. And that's come to Basel next year, because the ecosystem
is going to be Basel next year. And
yes.
Do you know the dates?
3rd to the 5th of March next year.
Okay. Any other things you want to talk about on the show?
Shameem, I could probably talk for hours and hours and hours on many, many things. What I love is the fact that we've gone full circle and gone from how can we use digital health to right down to the end of how do we just actually inform people on what health can look like, and support much more on the preventative side of things, which would wipe out the need for drugs and, in fairness, digital products. So, this is the thing is our if our last question is, do we actually really need digital health? Because if we're going for the proactive approach, ideally people won't need the options to be able to manage their drugs and their medication in that respect. But that's another question.
Carsten, any last words for this show? I mean,
no, for me it's fine. I just don't want to. the last words stay with you, and I'm really happy to having had this conversation, and then eventually looking forward to have another conversation another point in time. Thanks so much. I have nothing to comment. This was really a pleasure, James.
On that note, we are concluding our conversations with Quiwa. That is pronounced like queen with a wa at the end, so Quiwa. The people have been asking me how to pronounce that again. So thank you very much, and it was a great conversation. See you next time.
Thanks, Quiwa.